Well, this is actually much more comfy. Down the end there's a stool, like just over the leg, I should say, right in the middle, so I had to sort of sit back on.
Straddle the leg.
Well, welcome everybody to this city planning meeting, and I'd like to advise all present this evening the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the community via the City of Hobart YouTube channel, so welcome everybody. And due to physical distancing and density limits, we are limited for seating within the chamber, so we may pause between items to allow for members of the community wishing to address the committee to be accommodated within the chamber. So welcome to the committee. We have a full number of committee members here: Alderman Briscoe, Councillor Harvey, Alderman Barakis, Councillor Dutta and Councillor Coates. So minutes from the... Oh, we have nobody to co-opt. Item 2 is confirmation of minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. All those in favour? All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried unanimously. Item 3, consideration of supplementary items. I don't think we have any.
We have one.
Romilly Street. Yeah, of course we do. Yeah,
Move
thank
that.
you, Alderman Barakis. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 4 is indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. I have a conflict of interest for 7.1.5.
And I'll also declare an interest on 7.1.5.
Okay, thank you. Any other conflicts? No others? Okay. On that basis, we may need to transfer that agenda item since it's a committee decision, and we'll need quorum. I know that Alderman Barakis is leaving early, so we may need to transfer that, but I'll gauge that as we go after the deputation.
So transfer it closer first. Bring it forward. Yeah, thank
I'll
you.
call for that when we get to it. Item 6. Are there any transfer of any other agenda items?
Chair, to that effect, can I move or suggest that we do 7.1.5 first, maybe to get it out of the way, and then do Romilly Street next, given that that's, I think,
Yep.
one that's
Seems-
reasonably high interest, so we can get that out of the way before people need to sort of...
Certainly. So committee's okay with that? All right. Thank you. Thank you. Do we need to move that?
I would be just to put Alderman Barakis in the chair.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So might as well do that now, and then we'll go to... item 6 is planning authority items, considerations of items with deputations. Can I have
Yep,
somebody
so
move that?
moved.
Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. And item 7, we're now acting as a planning authority, and I'll ask that Alderman Barakis take the chair. And for 7.1.5 and declare
Take the chair?
it ends.
Do it from there if you want.
Oh, get some used to that. Get used to that.
Just get used to it.
I've only been there twice in 27 years.
View from up here.
Just breaking all the COVID safe, you know.
Oh, no. Oh, hang on. My things are just... So, have I been co-opted? I have, yeah.
Oh, so I'll move that Alderman Barakis becomes the chair, temporary chair.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Very good. So we're up to item, now what do you got? 7.1.5, which is 48, 50, 52 and 56 Salvatore Road, West Hobart. Now were there any? No. Does anybody want to start with questions or?
I'm happy to move the item, a recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Any other discussion? Oh, nice easy one. I'll move that then. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any against? No. Carried unanimously. It was a very short-lived time in the chair. That's it.
Me like that.
It does seem strange they've got to physically leave the room when they can then just watch it.
Get Alderman Harvey, Councillor Harvey back? Yeah.
I'll press the button.
Are you resisting the urge to start calling individually when you go to a vote?
It's good being back together, though. It's so much better.
Now we're up to... Let me get my...
7.1.4.
On the right agenda now. There we go. 13 next.
Up item 13.
Because when I suggested the transferring, it was 7.1.5 and then Romney Street. When I suggested.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yep, fine. Thank you. All right, we'll go to supplementary item 13, 32 Romley Street, South Hobart subdivision, 10 multiple dwellings, and we have a number of representatives, so if you could bring everybody in, please.
I'm a little pain. Things I haven't used all year.
I know. I actually got used to, I had this really nice big monitor at home.
Double screen.
So I was used to having that, you know, rather than...
Two. I had two. Perhaps we should set it up with...
Have a little workstation.
Yeah. We are live. That's okay. Yeah. Hi. All three of you. They've got to sign in, I think.
Yes. So first up, we've got Sam Stark and Felicity Spalding.
Okay.
They're together.
They're
Yeah.
presenting together?
Together. So we've had a few more people turn up.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Okay, so if you'd like to sit down, thank you for joining us. And we have Felicity Spalding
Oh, that's me. Hello.
and Sam Stark.
I'm
Thank you.
just assisting Sam, basically.
Yes, thank you. So, Sam, you have 5 minutes to address the committee, so if you can make your points, thank you, and then we'll ask some questions. You can sit down if you like.
Okay, I don't know.
Whatever you like, that's fine.
Just stand up just so I can see what's happening. I
Just speak into the microphone, please.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. Oh, God. Okay, just a quick introduction. I'm showing a series of photos and starting from the top of Romilly Street where it joins Woodworks Road, going down and then around. I'm talking about traffic, that's what I'm concentrating on, and the hazards to do with that. And so I'd just like councillors to bear in mind as you watch these slides, imagine you're a driver going down and wonder how you would actually cope with all these hazards. As I move around Hobart a lot, I would consider this one of the most hazardous areas that you could possibly put a development like this with such a large increase in traffic moving in and out of one driveway area. And it's mainly because of the way the road itself is, how narrow it is, a steep drop on one side and then the steep hillside of the reserve, as you can see there on the other side. And at every point when you're driving up or down here, doesn't matter which direction you're going in, you have a number of hazards to consider. And so you're on your mettle the whole time. Now, that is now, without introducing any other traffic. And what we need to consider too is imagining during the construction period for this development, there's bound to be a lot of heavy machinery moving in and out. Think about garbage collection days, which will be going on, you know, indefinitely, big trucks and so forth. So we're just looking at it now with basically ordinary sedans, the ordinary traffic. And these photos were taken quite early in the morning before the main traffic to work started. So just bear that in mind as well. And I would just remind councillors that this is an often used road to go to the Waterworks Reserve, which of course at the weekends is very popular, and a lot of people are travelling there, which wouldn't be captured if people just did a traffic survey on a weekday or even the rush times. It's very varied according to the day and the day of the week and the time of the day. But I can tell you at any time of day you've got to really be on your mettle to make sure you don't crash into something. Okay, so we're starting up, yeah, and they're going down towards the bridge. Bridge is on the right-hand side. And I'm showing also, there's a notice, I just want to point out too, the notices that were given to the public were in terribly inaccessible places, and they were only seen by people who are actually pedestrians walking, and one of them is on that very bridge on the right-hand side. Even there, coming right up to it, you can't see it. So then you go around that very steep, that's obviously a vehicle coming around that sharp curve, and if we next go on, just showing you that's the public notice on the bridge above the rivulet, which is an incredibly dangerous place to stop, as you could see, if you actually wanted to stop when you're in a car and read the notice. So up the hill again, thanks Craig. That's the next public notice, which is really low down and was obscured most of the time by a car parked in front of it on the roadside. That's the second notice. Just telling you in passing, because there's been a big issue about this. Thanks, Craig. Now, this is coming up the hill, and just before where this car is parked, just before where that driveway is, you can see how dangerous that is, and that's the car that's obscuring the public notice, actually. So imagine just behind that there'd be traffic coming in and out for all these construction and all the 9, 10, whatever, residences there. That's coming up to the top of the hill, and the reserves on the opposite. That's just, again, just past the pole on the right-hand side is the asphalt where the entrance is to the development. Just observe how narrow it is there, how difficult it is, again, to see traffic coming over that rise there at the crest of the hill. Thanks, Craig.
We've got 30 seconds before the 5 minutes is up, so if you'd like to summarise or just
and
go through
there's
all
the
of these.
car coming over the top. And Craig, if you just quickly go through a few others, that's looking downhill, a sign saying dangerous when frosty. That's another hazard in winter. Thanks, Craig. Car coming around, just see how far, out it has to be to avoid the ditch on the other side. That's the entrance to the walking and cycle track. That's another hazard with cyclists coming in and out as well as pedestrians, but the cyclists often go quite fast, swerve out or in front of traffic there. Thanks. Another view just showing you that's from the crest of the hill. You hardly have any time to see the cyclists or walkers coming there. The entrance to the development immediately on your left-hand side as you're going down the hill there. And this is cars parking right along that Romilly Street as you're coming up the hill. And that's the sort of space you have. Mostly at weekends there are cars parked right along those sides. So all the time you're going along, you've got all these traffic hazards. If you're going down towards Waterworks Road, you're going down there, that's how much room there is for 2 cars to park. That's slippery when frosty, and just trying to give you an idea of how narrow that road is, how many hazards there are. I've seen animals, wallabies and so on, killed on the side of the road. In winter, the sun shines right in your eyes as you're coming up the hill. You can't see. There's an idea how little room there is to pass. So all those factors, and also evacuation in bushfire times would be a big hazard too, I think. Not enough room to get out.
Thank you,
Okay,
Ms
thanks.
Stark. So I'll open it for questions. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity, isn't it? I've got it right.
Sam, I'm Felicity.
Oh, sorry, Sam. So you're aware the development has 24 car spaces inside the development, which is a bit more than is required. So presumably you won't get, in your estimation, you won't get residents parking on the road. They'll be parking down into their development, if that gets approval.
Shall I reply? Or you can
Well, I
reply?
understand that the residents have their parking areas and even a few for the guests.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they'll, you know, on occasions there's going to be probably a lot more guests, and there are already, in my opinion, an overflow from the other side of Romilly over the other side of the hill, which park down that road, and that's when it becomes really difficult if you come over the hill and then suddenly you've got these other cars that are parked on that downward side, just right outside the development area.
Yeah. So one solution would be, we often do it in this committee, is send a request to the infrastructure committee to look at the road, the management of traffic there, and sometimes yellow lines go in and other management solutions, because it's obviously a problem now. And you're saying your summary of what you've said is that having this development will make it worse. Yeah, so I know the street well, and I understand your problems there of cars parked on both sides and you've only got a single lane in the middle to get through. I understand.
I would suggest that even if some changes are made, that road is just, that's all the space there is.
Yes.
And no matter what lines you put there and how many cars you say don't park, and then what are you going to, it's still going to be hazardous, and what are you going to do? I think the people in the flats that are on the, you know, more or less opposite the development site, they could be contributing to the parking, but if you start cutting down all the other parking along the street, I'm sure you're going to have problems with that as well.
That's an infrastructure problem, not
Yeah.
so much a planning problem. Anyway, thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Harvey,
Just
then...
you referred to the garbage trucks in the area.
Yeah.
The report says that the garbage will be collected on site by a contractor. So it won't be the council garbage trucks parked on the road. It'll be contractors moving onto the site to collect.
Never have
24
to,
bins.
no council truck ever having to come to pick them all up together on the side? This is what
No.
we're a bit unclear about that,
No.
whether
The
maybe
report
they were
says-
all taken up to the top.
There was, well, in the report, there was reference to a contractor coming to collect the rubbish on site, and that there was bin locations in the property that would, and I'll just confirm that with the director. Yeah.
Just remind you, most people who were concerned about this in the Waterworks Valley only had about three days' notice after somebody actually saw the sign and pointed it out to people.
Yeah, it's...
So not much
Stand
time, sorry, Bill, for really looking into it all.
Councillor
in
Dutton?
detail.
Thank you, Chair. Sam, I take it that you're not against development.
Well, not totally, no, but I just think it's a very inappropriate site. It's a gem of bushland adjoining the reserve, and there's a rivulet there which is obviously, you know, got wildlife like platypus and the native water rat in it. I just think it's so, and it's also the route Darwin took to walk up to Mount Wellington, which in the future could be made into a really beautiful, well, it could be for tourists or for locals, but really emphasising that part of the history of our beautiful town.
Can I just ask a follow-up question then?
Yeah.
The follow-up question I have for you is, would you then say it's the density, if the numbers of development of the units are reduced to 6 or 7, for example, would that alleviate?
I really haven't had enough time to look into the detail of, you know, take away how many residents would make what difference. I mean, that it would involve how many trees and other vegetation have to be cut down for, you know, lesser or more dwellings and how much spoil might, be in danger of going into the river, despite whatever plan there might be to stop that happening. There's certainly some danger of that, and just disturbance to the wildlife who wouldn't be very happy with all that happening right above their homes. So I can't really say. It would reduce the number of cars going in and out, I suppose, but it's really a matter, apart from the traffic, it's a matter of the amount of vegetation that has to be removed, for whatever number of houses, I think.
Just to speak for my neighbour and I, who are directly opposite. And we're going to be looking at 4 layers of houses, where right now we see beautiful bushland. We are open to compromise with the developer, but our main point is we really would not like to see that privacy, that noise barrier, and equally for the people living in the houses. We wouldn't like to see that removed. So yeah, if they could not cut into the existing vegetation, that would be fabulous.
So that you live directly opposite, and you would be willing to have discussions with the proponent, right? Thank you.
That would help. Yes, very willing.
Are there any further questions from committee? No, I'll just, Ms Stark, you're talking about the traffic hazards. What average speed would you consider cars go along there now? Along Romilly Street?
In one of the photos, I don't know whether you saw, the sign at the top on the Davey Street or town side, it's got 35 k's an hour for going down, but actually you'd be silly to even go that fast.
No, the question was what speed do you think cars go now?
What speed? Well, as I said, I don't really know. I just hope that they would go 35 or under. All I know is when I go up or down that street, I probably go at 20 k's or less, because
okay.
And of course, and there are cyclists sometimes in front of you, like there were yesterday when I went there, and you just have to wait and wait and wait, because you can't pass them without pushing them into a parked car or into the curb.
I don't know if anybody noticed in the traffic report, and there's been, I don't know if this is many, but it seems like a lot to me. There's been 4 accidents along that road, and it's basically because it's so overburdened with parking on both sides. So, you can't really, a lot of the time you can't drive fast, you have to drive slow.
And as you mentioned pedestrian, or you talked a bit about pedestrians and the footpath, how easy is it to traverse that part of Romilly Street?
There aren't any footpaths along there at all. Do you know that? So on one side there's the reserve with a bank going up to the walking track, and then there's this narrow road, Romilly Street, and on the other side there's a drop straight down to the Sandy Bay Rivulet. So that's all there is, and that's why animals get killed.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take note of the advertising. I think they're probably in positions where they are abutting. They're on abutting land. Is that right? Yeah. So it's
that's correct.
Sometimes a bit difficult to make them really obvious, unfortunately.
All
right.
I understand that. It just seems undemocratic when so few people were actually able to be notified sensibly about it.
Yeah.
I've got photos of each of the 4 notices as they were in situ. So if anyone's interested, I'll be happy to share those with you.
We'll take note. All right, if you'd like to resume your seats either in the other room or at the back. I'm not sure what the protocol is, Dave and Rachel. And we have other deputations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I think they all want to come, David. David? I think they all want to come.
So if you'd like to just take a seat at the back.
If we're going to do it properly.
All right, is this Mr Blackwell?
Yes.
Hello, Mr Blackwell. Take a seat.
Thank you.
And you have 5 minutes to address the committee of your concerns. Thank you. And then we'll ask questions.
Thank you very much. I represent the Friends of Sandy Bay Rivulet. We're committed, as is the Council, to the protection of the natural, historic, cultural and recreational values of the rivulet, including through advancing the linear park concept plan which the Council commissioned. My argument concerns the exercise of discretion in relation to impacts on the waterway protection area and covenant area, comprising the lower portion of the site, which is important habitat and important to the condition of the habitat in the rivulet, which supports 5 native fish species, and happy to provide more details if anyone would like to look at that. On page 67 of the committee paper, at 6.18.3, Council notes that the proposal is non-compliant and therefore assessment against the performance criteria is relied on. Contrary to the assessment, I contend that the proposal does not adequately avoid or mitigate impacts on natural values, runoff impacts on natural values, impacts on riparian vegetation, or avoid significantly impeding natural flow and drainage, or maintain fish passage. This is because the development requires increasing the sealed area of the site by a little over 1,400 square metres, or about 19% of the site, in addition to what's already sealed. Every square metre sealed reduces rain infiltration, rapidly diverting rainwater directly into the rivulet, both depriving the riparian vegetation of that rainwater's contribution to the groundwater that would previously have moved downhill through the soil where it is relied on by the riparian vegetation and where it is fundamental to the base flow of the rivulet. The water seen in the rivulet is just the surface expression of the groundwater. On this site, the best areas for infiltration are the flatter areas. Now, referring to the map there, the left-hand area towards the bridge, that's not affected by the sealing. The flatter areas are in the centre, and the main trees, which provide habitat, are at the perimeter of that flatter area. So, by my estimation, by sealing that flattest area, which is the best for infiltration, and directly feeds those habitat trees, the moisture loss to those trees could be greater than 20% of what they currently experience. As the dwellings are pushed hard up against the trees, I think this will inevitably lead to the bushfire report recommending that many of the same trees the Council here recommends keeping for habitat actually need to be removed at the time of building application because they both will pose a fire risk to dwellings so hard up against them, and as those trees dry out and some die through loss of water, the fire hazard will increase. If we could move to the next slide, the stormwater report included in the applicant's document suggests construction of an 11,600 litre detention tank. So basically all that hard surface, which is almost 2,000 square metres, including what's currently there, during a downpour, that would be diverted to the detention tank, and then it's got a slowed release. So they're showing that under the detention tank model, the peak flow is a little less than what is the current estimated peak flow. But this model is entirely based on a 5-minute downpour. In 2018, there were 129 millimetres fell in 12 hours, and we know that such extreme events can be expected more frequently. So, although much of that fell in 4 hours, in that 12 hours, there was 2.5 million litres fell, and the maximum rate at which this detention tank could relieve itself is about 400,000 litres in the same 12 hours. So thus, the capacity of the system would be more than 5 times overloaded.
Mr Blackwell, your time's almost up, so if you'd like to summarise.
Yep, if we could just move to the next slide. That just shows you just how much the site is vulnerable to fire, and the houses are pushed right down to the very perimeter of that fringing vegetation. If we could move to the next slide, please. This is the Huon Packhorse track, built back in the early 1830s. You can see the stonework there. And if we could move to the next slide. So that bench, this is on the private property at the lower end, and you can see the base of some steps at the left. The lowest of those dwellings would be right here adjacent to this historic feature, and the stormwater diversion may well require digging up part of this track, which in fact should be part of the a rivulet track for the public, and is in any case a historic place that should be kept.
So you're saying that the buildings would be down to this level?
It's just a little higher.
We'll check that with the applicant and the director. Okay, so have you finished? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions, Alderman Briscoe?
Just very briefly, thank you, Peter. That's very interesting. There is a covenant around this property, isn't there? Is that a vegetation covenant? Or?
Yes, it's a 10-metre covenant around the perimeter. So in theory, that's about the cutting of the vegetation, but it doesn't protect its water supply, and that's why I'm concerned about the sealing of so much of the area that enables rainwater to infiltrate and therefore enable that vegetation to survive, and the stream itself.
So, in fact, if we put a condition or a condition in it to have the equivalent loss of water done by irrigation, could you do it that way? Or?
It would be complicated to maintain. It would be important to maximise the types of sealing that enable infiltration. There are models, but I see it difficult on this site because of its steepness and vulnerability to frost. The temperature there is often -4 degrees overnight in winter, and if you've got cars trying to come and go, the more you allow grass to grow in amongst your driveways, the harder it is, or the less likely they are to survive.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Harvey?
Peter, you were comparing the 1% rainfall event of 2018 with shorter rainfall periods. So I don't think anything would survive what we had in May 2018. So do you think it's fair to be comparing the 100-year event to the normal everyday rainfall events that we,
I guess the main thing I'm saying is what happens when that system overloads. The more infiltration area there is, the more there's intact vegetation across the site, the less the impact. A system like this considerably increases, more than doubles the sealed area that's then from which a downpour then progresses down the steep part of the slope where erosion is more likely to be a risk.
All right, I'm just reading the stormwater report again, which at 6,000 square metres will be landscaped in such a manner that shall not affect the peak stormwater runoff.
Yeah, I've based my figures on the sealed area, which is roofing and car parks and driveways.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Blackwell, just one question. With regards to the impact that we have talked about, does this mean or imply that you are against the development totally, or you would be happy to consider the development at not such a density as well?
Yes, I'm sure a more sympathetic development could be accommodated on the site, and so my biggest problem is the dwellings that are lowest down the hill and hard up against the existing vegetation. One of them actually has a balcony that overtops part of the covenant area. I guess it doesn't have a footing in the covenant area, but it's it nevertheless overshadows it and almost reaches into the canopy of the trees.
So just a follow-up question then to what you're saying. So if we, or if the suggestion was made that you take away Unit 2 and Unit 3, would that in any way have a lesser impact?
Any reduction in the number of dwellings would lessen its impacts,
Thank you.
or a consolidation of them higher up the site.
Mr Blackwell, was there any, like with the detention tank, was there any modifications or suggestions apart from hard surfaces that you suggest?
I'm not familiar with alternative models, but I'm also not keen to advocate a bigger detention tank. Perhaps an alternative would be several pointing in different directions. The difficulty is the more you've got to excavate to stick these things in the ground, the more you might be creating other problems of tunnel erosion or excavating things you don't want to. And then the outlet pipe has to cross the area where the Huon Packhorse track is originally sited. Part of it is probably buried where rubble was tipped down the slope after the 67 bushfires, so the original alignment might be buried underneath that and inadvertently damaged in the course of the stormwater drainage works.
And you're representing Friends of Sandy Bay Rivulet. They've obviously had a long desire to have a walkway along here. Are you surprised that there's no sort of reference to public open space?
I am, and this is a block that, now I have to explain, I've only been involved with them for about a year, so I'm still learning, but I understand they have a long history of pursuing the linear park. It's not entirely about a walkway, it's really about protecting the values of the rivulet and the community that loves it, but increasing walkways would be valuable, and given that the lower waterworks, lower pipeline track comes out just on the top side of Romilly Street opposite this site, it would be an obvious linkage opportunity between a pathway, part of which Friends of Sandy Bay maintain lower down, and we're working to progress, but this should be part of that pathway, and there needs somewhere in that vicinity, and this site offers some opportunity, a linkage to the lower pipeline track.
Yep, thank you. And I know that other representors who are members of Friends of Sandy Bay Rivulet have raised these issues, so thank you. All right, if there are no further questions, you'd like to take your seat again, thank you. We'll just do a quick clean before we get somebody else up. Is Mr Ziegler. So Rachel's just going to clean the area. You're...
Ask the director a question while we're waiting.
Probably better. Can we just wait?
Yeah.
All right, can we have Mr Ziegler come to the table, please? Thank you. And Mr Ziegler, you've probably, I hope you've heard all of the questions and deputations so far. If you can perhaps raise other points.
Yep.
Thank you.
In fact,
first of all, I'm a resident at 104 Waterworks Road. That's the view from my lounge room window directly towards 32 Romilly Street. I've resided at 104 Waterworks Road for 42 years. But first of all, let me say I'm very disappointed, disturbed, troubled even by the inadequacy of this process, because although I am a neighbour, I was excluded from this process. And it's only by Buckley's chance that I'm here anyway. I'll be asking councillors to fix this problem, this anomaly, so that in future people are not shut out of the process at all. And I'll be explaining later on to councillors why I have been shut out. But anyway, such a large development also needs, because it has a potential impact on more people than the immediate neighbours, the wider community should also be better informed about such a development. And that's why I've asked several people to grant an extension of time to this process, this planning process. Let me dwell upon that later with councillors anyway. I'm in favour of infill city dwellings, city housing. Multiple dwellings on a block ought to be advantageous to everyone in the neighbourhood, in that it should make the rates much cheaper. It should make services much cheaper because there will be a lot more people sharing those, sharing the cost of those services. And the development at 32 Romilly Street has the potential for doing this, but with the present plan, it would be at the cost of all the neighbours, in that it would reduce the intrinsic values of their properties. One of the major reasons for settling in this area 42 years ago was that the idea of being able to live in bushland with all its qualities, calming influence that a sylvan setting provides, and yet still be only 10 minutes from the city centre. This is the major value of living in this valley. Since settling here, I've been pleased that 5 new neighbours whose new houses have not impacted on the bush, and they've been able to share the quiet enjoyment and character of the area. This includes the previous occupants of numbers 30 and 32 Romilly Street. But this proposed development destroys the enjoyment, the character, the quality, the value of this area. I oppose the development in the present form because of the devaluation of the surrounding properties, especially by the removal of trees. Even the economic value of houses will be reduced. The removal of trees, for example, leaves me staring at from my lounge room window into the living rooms of 7 dwellings at 30 and 32 Romilly Street. On page 227 of attachment D, it says that the developer must not cause loss of amenity with the visual impact of the apparent scale, bulk or proportions when viewed from adjoining lots. Now, with trees removed as the developer wants, 4 layers of 2-storey houses will be exposed with no visual separation, and that's equivalent to having an 8-storey building up that hill. If I could see that photo again. That's the view from my lounge room window, and the view doesn't go down into the creek. It starts from just above that Covenant area. If you can imagine this, that my view with those trees removed would have 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of buildings, each of them 2 stories high, and go from the bottom of that photo right up to the level of that White House that you can see at the top, near the top of the hill on the middle left-hand side. And that's the impact it would have.
Okay, if you'd like to wrap up, your time's
Right.
almost up.
All right, some of the buildings poke above the maximum height envelope and one intrudes on the Covenant area, and I think Peter has explained that already. As well as causing the loss of visual amenity, the developer would also be reducing the privacy which ought to be enjoyed by his occupants of his dwellings. Although the environmental report recommends the retention of 4 of those trees, that's not enough to prevent this devaluation. 6.18.4 on page 67 states the developer must avoid or mitigate impact on natural values and also minimise the impact on vegetation, and the removal of 13 trees that he proposes is not minimal, it's a major impact.
Okay. Is there much more?
Well, let me just summarise by saying I don't mind development in that area. The developer could still maximise his profit by changing the design, by reducing the number of houses, shifting them elsewhere. The property would be worthwhile. But he should not proceed with the development at the expense of others.
Right, thank you. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Mr. Ziegler, it appears then from your summary that you are not against development.
No.
But from what you have been saying, if Unit 2 and 3 were removed, would that in any way be satisfactory?
I would suggest that numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4 need to be removed to retain the trees necessary to retain the privacy. In fact, the developer could retain numbers 5 and 6 and maybe squeeze in another one next to number 9 up the hill, and that would be satisfactory. But the major point is that the removal of trees will impact on the whole value of living there. The whole amphitheatre is a bushland setting for all my neighbours.
Any further questions?
Just a question with regard to the incursion into the covenanted area. You're referring to Unit 2, I assume, with there's a corner.
Number 2 that that overlaps into the covenant area.
And that's a piece of the decking that goes in. So it's not the building as such, it's the deck.
I think it's number 3 that is above the maximum height that is recommended.
Okay, but I'm just clarifying the building's going into the covenanted area, so there's not a big incursion. It's just that little corner. Okay. Yep.
Yes, well...
Before you leave, Mr Ziegler, I just want to ask the Director in relation to those, the trees that Mr Ziegler's talking about, are they in that covenanted area, and are they likely to all
I believe 4 of them
Sorry,
are.
Mr Ziegler, I'm just asking.
Sorry.
Yep, thank you. Just for clarification for perhaps everybody.
Yeah, yes, through you, well, to you, Chair. There are some that are within the covenant area that are proposed to be removed but conditioned to be retained. Looking at the plan, there appears to be 5 within the coveted area that are supposed to be removed or retained, but yeah, no, that's how I understand it.
Just to clarify, it was proposed to remove 4 and they're conditioned to be retained, and is there an additional series of trees that will be removed out of the 13 others?
That's right, but they're not in the covenanted area.
So it's only, so there's no trees removed in the covenanted area?
One to be removed in the covenanted area. That is my assessment, but Mr Fraser might be able to clarify that as well. There will be a number outside the covenanted area to be removed as well.
But part of the landscaping plan will be to do further plantings?
I'm not sure whether there's a landscape plan proposed, but we certainly could look at that.
It is mentioned in the report that there will be a landscape plan for the whole area.
Thank you. So is there any further questions for Mr Ziegler? If not, thank you. If you'd like to take your seat. And
I knew I was
Rachel will wipe things down again, and we'll seek Mr Jonah Goldthorpe in a moment. Well done, Rachel. Multi-skilled. Thank you very much. All right, Mr Goldthorpe. So again, if you have points that might be different from others already raised, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. My name's Jonah Goldthorpe. I live in Waterworks Road. I'm making a representation about this development. 5 points of fact and a question. I hope I'll only take a couple of minutes. You're hearing a lot of talk about trees. You're going to hear a variation on that from me. The plan in the development application was to clear about 2/3 of the trees on this site, and mostly blue gums. and the majority of those trees are not inside the building footprint. We know from the development application that this was not for reasons of bushfire or other risk. Now 4 of these trees, it seems, will be retained, and they're the 4 trees in the Covenant area. There are several recent records from this immediate area from the Natural Values Atlas of swift parrots feeding in blue gums. Swift parrots are a critically endangered or almost extinct bird, and they feed mostly on blue gums. And the major reason that they are almost extinct is loss of blue gum trees. Across eastern seaboard of Australia, there are likely 100 developments like this going on at the moment, little by little. My question on notice to officers and aldermen is, why don't we have any protection for swift parrots or other biodiversity values in the planning scheme in the zone that we're looking at here? Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Neuer, I'm going to hand that over to you.
The property is zoned in a residential and has been zoned for such for some time. Those values had not been identified as part of the planning scheme drafting. But having said that, we recognised mature blue gums are an important habitat for swift parrot, and we've recognised that by requiring 4 of those mature blue gums to be retained.
All right. Is there anything else that you wish to add?
No, nothing else that I wish to add, thanks. But my question is a bigger question with a bigger answer, which I understand you can't possibly begin to make now.
No, thank you for raising it.
Do you think there is provision for answering that question over time?
Well, I think that it's something that we can consider. Obviously, there is this ongoing impact, and whether there's that possibility to protect through the planning scheme.
I'll just add further, I suppose, to my response, Chair. Clearly, the Waterway Code does recognise the importance of retaining vegetation within that riparian corridor, and I suppose we, as officers, recognise that and wish to minimise destruction of that vegetation within that corridor. Noting that this is zoned in a residential, noting that any development of this site will require reticulated stormwater services to be provided to the Sandy Bay rivulet. So to some degree the zoning dictates that connection to be made. We need to ensure that the impacts are minimised as much as possible.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. So are there any questions?
Well, just a question.
Councillor Harvey.
I don't know if it's the right time now, but the planning scheme seems to me well outdated when it comes to things like protecting trees that 5 years ago we had a different view of, 10 years ago we had a different view of. So I guess that's the question for me in response to what you're seeking, is when does the modern planning scheme come in that addresses those issues? And it's a bigger question than what we're probably going to answer tonight.
I think so. So are there any questions of Mr. Goldthorpe?
Well, only to, sorry, just to say, looking at page 317, I'm not sure if you've seen that page, but that's got the list of the trees that will be removed.
Yes.
And I'm not familiar with each of those trees. So I guess through you, Chair, those individual trees have been evaluated against the provisions of biodiversity conservation through you to the Director, or are they, it doesn't matter because it's a residential piece of land, and therefore it's irrelevant?
Look, I think it's relevant so far as the covenant area is concerned, because that's where the protection provisions apply. It's not so necessarily so relevant in the area not within that protection zone and within the inner residential zone. And the zoning is important because clearly there's an expectation that development can occur within that precinct. It is suitably serviced. It is in close proximity to social services within the city, and hence why that zoning has been in place for a long time.
But just, sorry to dwell on it, but just to clarify, those individual trees within the clearing area, even if they were old enough to have hollows in them and were habitat trees, there would still be no provision that would protect them.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. That's correct.
Okay, all right.
And under the planning scheme.
Yeah, under this old school planning scheme.
Under the 2015 interim plans.
Are there any other questions? I just have a question. So if there was an opportunity to talk directly with the developer, presumably you haven't done that as yet, would you be interested in doing that to try and get some better resolution?
I suppose I'd be interested in asking the question, okay, the trees inside the building footprint, yes, understand why they're going. The trees outside the building footprint, what is the actual reason for removing them? We know it's not risk, we know it's not bushfire.
Okay. Well, we'll hear from the proponent in a moment, so they'll be able to give us an answer for that. Okay, thanks. You. If you'd like to resume your seat. And after we wipe things down, we have Mr. Don Nola to speak. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Nola. No, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Don Nola. I live at 40 Rumley Street, adjacent to the proposed development site. But I'd like to address the natural values of the site. I was going to go into great detail about the removal of trees, but I think that has been covered already to an extent. I'd like to specifically talk about the birds and the animals that are seen on this site. And for instance, when I woke this morning, a green rosella, a bird you only find in Tasmania, was calling from the very site of the proposed development. It was joined in a chorus by a yellow-throated honeyeater, a yellow wattlebird, and a black-headed honeyeater, birds also only found in Tasmania. These birds don't have a direct voice in planning matters, and this morning I decided to give them one in respect of this application, although I've already submitted objections. On the face of it, the scale of this development and the clearing of trees to make way for it will crowd out the birds and animals. The birds I mentioned are among the 12 species endemic to Tasmania, and I found 11 of them on this site or just below it, on the banks of Sandy Bay rivulet. I won't mention swift parrots at this point. Not only the birds, the site also provides a vital wildlife corridor linking the east and west of the Waterworks Valley. In my garden bordering the land earmarked for development, I've seen Bennett's wallaby, pademelon, potteroo, bandicoot, ring and brush-tailed possum, echidna, and even a dusky antechinus. The scale of this proposed development, 9 homes and the existing dwelling, will represent, I believe, an intrusion not only on the lives of wildlife, but the families, human families, who live in the vicinity. You know, I'm leaving it to others to talk of traffic hazards and visual amenity. In my family's case, and I'm sure those others who choose to live in Waterworks Valley, the sense of living close to the bush in an area with natural values makes life in the valley special. But as with other developments along Romilly Street and Waterworks Road, the bucolic nature of the area is slowly being, piece by piece, eroded. With the impact on wildlife, including an increase in roadkill in an area regarded already as a roadkill hotspot, I also have concerns about the impact proposed development will have on plans to create a trail along the Sandy Bay rivulet. I'm happy for the Friends of the Sandy Bay rivulet, of which I am a member, to speak on that. And that's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Nola. Do we have any questions? Councillor Dutta, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 questions. Question number 1, has there been any discussion with the developer?
No.
Nothing at all? Okay. And question number 2, it appears that you have referred to the scale a few times. So if the scale was reduced, would that in any way justify the development?
Yeah, I wouldn't be. I'm particularly, well, the removal of trees is a great concern to me, and also the way the development pushes, it appears against the rivulet. You know, that is a serious concern. So I would, you know, I'm not opposed. I'm not an NIMBY. I'm not opposed to development. I know it's quite a big site, actually. Could be described as a wasted site, but I think the scale of it's too big, this development, for that area. And I noted earlier when people were talking about the traffic hazard, people parking on Romilly Street, and there's a suggestion that, oh no, everyone will be parking on the side. Well, I think, was it 20 or 25 parking spaces were mentioned? I mean, that's a lot of space just to give over to motor cars, actually, at the expense, I believe, of the local wildlife.
Any further questions?
I've got a hypothetical. But
Councillor Harvey?
Don, having visited the site, it's a completely weed-infested site. It's got some really terrible weeds that the council spends a lot of money getting rid of, and I dare say a notice probably should be served on the land. Do you think there's an opportunity for a trade-off or a compensation package? I haven't been down to the rivulet because you can't see it because of the weeds when you cross the bridge.
Fallen trees, the fallen...
Well, and the Cotoneaster that blocks out the view.
Yep.
The trade-off of improving the riparian zone within the covenant versus the loss of those dozen or so trees within the footprint of the development. There could be room. I'm not opposed to developing that site. It's just the scale, and obviously if it was revised, I'd have to, and other members in the community would obviously have to look at the plans, but I'm not actually... I'm hypothetical about the potential of the riparian zone, which is fairly weedy. Would that compensate by repairing that, restoring it, against the loss of the habitat, you know, those trees? For other birds, not the swift parrot, the swift parrot, the swift's hollows in the trees, but other habitat for the other 11 species of birds you referred to.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a possibility, but we obviously have to look very closely at what was proposed. As I say, I'm not opposed to developing the site, but it's the scale of it that worries me.
All right, that was maybe my distraction, but anyway.
You haven't raised it in your deputation, but if this were to be developed, and you've probably seen, you have obviously seen other developments around, along Romilly or along Waterworks Road, just in relation to bushfire protection, I mean, are you seeing a lot of habitat going, like large trees going with bushfire protection zones?
That's a very difficult question. I mean, you're talking about fire breaks, creating fire breaks for the
No, I'm
rivulets are
talking
natural
about,
fire break.
I'm talking about trees being removed when developments occur because of bushfire
But
protection.
the threat of bushfire. Well,
You don't, yeah, that's all right if you
I'm
can't
not
answer.
aware of sites where the trees have been removed, actually. They've been pretty, the sites that I'm aware of, 3 sites, I don't think there were any trees on those sites. It was
Okay.
paddocks. It was part farmland from the old days of when Romilly Street was a farming community.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No questions? Thank you. If you'd like to take your seat again. Thank you. And we now have the applicant, Mr James Atkinson and Fraser Reid from All Urban Planning. If you'd like to come to the table, thank you. Thank you. Now, you've heard some of the concerns raised, so it'd be good if you could answer some of those concerns.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Look, it's tricky to respond to those issues, and I think the committee will probably understand some of the reasons from a planning sense around those. So from, as Mr Noy pointed out, this is the inner residential zone, so it's the highest order zone that the city has. It's not the normal general residential zone, it's not a low density residential zone, it's the inner residential zone. So the target density for this site is between 18 and 38 dwellings or something like that, 36 dwellings. This is actually discretionary because we're not meeting that target. So it's not discretionary because it's over density, it's discretionary because it's less than half the allowable density. So 36 is the permitted, which is 1 dwelling per 200 square metres. So that's what the planning scheme looks for. The lowest density you can do while still complying, just bearing in mind that when council applied this zone, it was looking for efficient use of this land, this well-located, essentially inner city land is how council has applied that zone. And we're proposing a density of 1 per 787 square metres or something like that. So we're nearly 1/2 or twice the density of the lowest density that council's looking for. So we're already looking for a significant discretion from council there because we're developing below the density. In terms of the covenanted area, we note council's condition about retention of those 4 trees, and we agree with that condition. Other than that, I suppose we see that it's a sensible development that's making best use of this land, and the fact that we are going for half the allowable density is a quarter of the full density, half the allowable density, shows that we have responded, the applicant has responded to the other constraints of the site and is really sympathetic to try and maintain the character of the area. And council no doubt will have seen many developments that actually push it right to the limit. This is well away from that. So I might just pass to James, if you might want to say a little bit more about your philosophy, and then it's probably, if we open to questions, probably is the best way to assist you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I suppose from our point of view, when we looked at this project, we really wanted to work within the natural environment of the region and the community. And the proposal that's being put forward best suits itself to that local topography and following the contours of what is a couple of units down the bottom and some units at top, and really work within the site that's there. The wildlife corridor is particularly important to sustain, and you'll see on, I think it's plan number 2, there's quite a significant region above the covenant area that's elected for future landscaping to maintain bandwidth of wildlife corridor all throughout. The site has a large amount of trees, 85 exceeding 200 millimetres, greater than 150 trees between 100 millimetres and 200 millimetres in trunk girth. And we're proposing, with the council's recommendation, to reduce that to take 11. And 2/3 of those are blue gum and beautiful species for the fauna that we've got in the region. So we've approached a minimalist view in our take. All the other discussion points, there are engineering reasons for a lot of those requirements as it's proposed. But I just wanted to say that it is of concern for us to do this really well in fitting with the region, and that's why we think this approach that's before us tonight has been well considered and carefully prepared to make sure we maximise the local amenity.
Okay. Are there anything else that you want to add?
I think we're best to assist you with any questions.
Okay. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you for that, Fraser and Mr. Atkinson. James, is it possible, I mean, a big concern was the loss of the amenity for neighbours looking to a big development site, and I understand that you're saying you could have developed a lot more, or potentially develop a lot more, in doing plantings that would screen your development more. Is it possible, there is a landscape plan mentioned, but if we had a condition to plantings of trees, for example, that or bushes that would attract birds and also screen, would that be acceptable?
I think the intention is to do further landscaping. In terms of the screening, I think retention of those larger trees, those 4 trees within there, plus all the others within the covenanted area, will actually still provide a substantial screen across the rivulet valley. Yeah. But yeah, the intention is to do further landscaping.
Yeah. I suppose in that area, though, you could landscape with European trees, for example. What I'm saying is, would you be prepared to make sure that the native trees or bushes that do facilitate birds, because we have heard from Mr. Nola that 11 out of the 12 endemic species, or I think I heard, of the birds in that area. Yep.
There's no problems with it. We're happy to, specialise native.
Indigenous to that area, which attract birds. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can't think of his name, but there's a well-renowned landscape planner of native species from up at Ridgeway that's been engaged and is already active on this project.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, James and Fraser. There was a couple of issues I'd like to raise. One was the stormwater and retention on site versus percolation and drying out of the various areas because of the hard stand and therefore the increased runoff. I did read that that's compensated for to some degree. Could you just confirm how stormwater runoff will be handled, including whether or not it will cross? I haven't seen the Packhorse track in the track at the bottom that was referred to. Would the stormwater entry into the rivulet cross that track, or would it be further downstream from that track, or does it have to cross the track?
So I've only, in looking at what's been presented tonight and on site, the egress point for the stormwater was proposed to be more northeastern of the site, which is outside, crossing the Covenant region, which is outside the known location that's been talked to tonight. There's no obvious signs by our consultants down in that region. It could be to do with rubbish that was dumped in bushfires. I can't speak to that. But the particular areas that were mentioned tonight are protected, are in the Covenant zone, and they're sort of more towards the southeast side of the site. So that's from a disturbance to see an outfall. From a capacity of the stormwater, I'm not a hydraulic engineer, However, my understanding is that's been designed in reflection to the standards. The peak event, the 1%, 1 in 100, every stormwater system's going to overcap and follow out its overcapping process for those events. The design of the site allows for some landscaping in stage regions to allow for basically the entrapment of any water or skyborne water hitting the ground. The hard surfaces have been minimised where at all possible. So we've done everything we can reasonably do to minimise the amount of hard areas, maximise the amount of areas that will receive natural rainfall event. And certainly the regions that we've been talking about tonight of high concern are within a lot of those regions.
All right.
Just in terms of the impervious surfaces, in terms of how the planning scheme works, the target is for 25% impervious surface retained, free of impervious surfaces. And in this case, we've got 5,100 square metres free, and it's, I think it's something like, well, it's certainly less than half the site is covered.
All right. And sorry, if I can have another one. Management of the riparian zone and the covenanted area. I only had a look from the top looking down, so I'm not familiar with the vegetation down the hill. So, but I do have issues with weed management across the whole valley. Is there any sort of guarantee that, like I was mentioning to Don before, that improving of the riparian zone by, getting rid of the invasive species to provide a better habitat for those 11 endemic species potentially, is that something we could also talk about, that the quality of that riparian zone could be improved and the covenanted area? And you mentioned there's landscape plans and things. Would that add value to both the covenanted area, including the riparian? So we get a section of rivulet that's actually quite, well looked after and maintained.
I think we can do a weed management plan and supplementary planting.
I'm not sure. My hesitancy in answering that is I'm not sure about how much I'm allowed to do in the covenant zone. So it's obviously been kept minimum disturbance for an outfall pipe. But if we're allowed to participate in helping make that better, selective removal of undesirable species is certainly within our remit to assist with. That's for sure.
So we could end up with a better outcome in both the covenanted and the riparian zone. Is that something we've conditioned already with part of the vegetation management plan?
Look,
can't scroll through 500 pages fast enough to find it.
Look, not that I'm aware of, but Ms. Ovey, no. So we'd need to incorporate an additional condition. But
would that be a condition that you could live with tonight, or does it need that we would have a condition to manage the weeds within the riparian and the
site generally,
in the covenanted zone?
And the site generally,
and the
yes.
site generally.
We'll take that one. Okay, thank you. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. With regards to the consultation and discussion with the neighbours, I have heard that there was none. Would you be prepared to defer this and have a discussion? Because most of them, it appears, are not against the development, but it's the scale and the density. That's question one.
An answer to that? Look, it's up to James, but from my perspective, it's a highly compliant development, and the concerns are around density and things like that. And to some extent, there's a mismatch between what the planning scheme's looking for and what the representor's expectations are. I suppose we don't close the door on those discussions, but I'm not sure whether it will lead to an end.
I think the understanding of information tonight does help people probably solve some misclose. We have worked extensively with the owners of 30 Romilly Street. They are arguably the most impacted stakeholder in this project, and that led to a number of amendments in our approach that's led to the submission that you have before you. They talked about all of these topics with one regards or another, and because they overlooked the project, they worked alongside it, they're in the middle of it, their voice was quite strong, and it's now quite strong, and we've walked a journey with them, and they support it. Yeah, so yes, happy to talk to anyone about any topic, but I think the thoroughness and the thoughtfulness and the care that's led to the plan that sits before you will consider a large percentage of those topics.
And the next question, Chair, through you, there has been also been, there are a number of issues that has been brought up. The other one that is quite significant in my view is the traffic and the vehicle movement. From the report, it appears from what I've read that there's going to be an increase of about 450% movement per day. That is quite huge and definitely would impact and may not satisfy clause 5.5.1 P3. Would you give consideration to that again in the context of reducing the units?
Well, I think, can I? Yeah. The percentage assessment is against its current access and egress. Yep, so that is a large number. When you look at the assessment that's been performed in light of the capacity of that road, you will find that the addition of these extra movements puts it nowhere near saturation of the capacity of this road, notwithstanding the nature of the road and the challenges with the fact that it is quite a narrow, awkward road. Notwithstanding that, it still meets all of those requirements, and the addition doesn't increase this road beyond any form of capacity. It's a very low usage road in the scheme of things.
Thank you.
Alderman Briscoe?
Yes, thank you. It's more of probably my interest than anything else, but you could reduce the amount of concrete area if you reduce the amount of parking down to, I think it's 23 and you're having 24 or 24 or 25. You're actually asking for a discretion for more parking than which is very rare. Usually people ask for a discretion for less parking. Would you like to comment about that?
There's a requirement for 23 and there's 24 proposed.
That's correct. Yeah.
You only require 23, but you're asking for 24.
That's right.
So you're suggesting, would you lower that?
Lower that? Well, why do you need that extra one when it's not required under the planning scheme?
Because there was a location that allowed safely to establish 3, I think, instead of 2. And so it was deemed that there was a net benefit to the project to put those 3 in there instead of the 2 that were needed. You could increase some garden bed and reduce that back to 2, but I think the analysis that we did was would be better to add some redundancy there versus the loss of 5 metres by 1.5 metres of extra garden bed or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's the first time I've ever seen an oversupply of parking rather than undersupply of parking. I was just curious.
Probably an abnormality in space. So
yeah, thank you.
Mr. Reid, the parking areas, can they be semi-permeable?
Can they be?
Yeah.
Probably James, but he's got the civil expertise.
Yeah. I'm not aware of that being done in this sort of environment. I have seen it in I've seen it in Launceston actually, but it was a very different circumstance and a lot flatter and controlled.
All right. I have some questions in relation. Mr. Coates, Councillor Coates, do you have any questions?
No. I'll listen.
So just in relation to the driveway, because we actually haven't covered this at all, so it's quite steep and it's south-facing. We know it's a fairly cold, damp valley. What sort of guarantees do you have in relation to access through to those lower units as well as up onto the roadway?
Yeah, so Yep, we acknowledge that it's South Hobart and there's months of the year where it's wet and cold and potentially icy. So the grades have been designed in such though that it meets all the minimum requirements around maximum grade. We've further to that, and I don't think it's fully clarified until the building stage, but it's going to be an exposed textured surface. So it'll have, call it exposed concrete, which will give it a much rougher surface, which exceeds the Australian standards for roughness by, I don't know, tenfold or something. So it's a really good surface. So it can take some minor frost underneath those pointed edges of aggregate, and it will be the best probably alternative to normal asphalts and different things that are used.
The traffic report, you know, talks about sight lines, and I think the sight lines sort of only just border probably 40 or 50 metres, you know, like it's not very far either way coming around those corners or over the crest. And it also averages out the traffic movements rather than saying, well, at peak time, this is going to be the problem. What sort of safeguards will you be putting on in relation to access onto the road, turning mainly right in the mornings?
So as I understand the traffic assessment, I'm not a traffic engineer, but in consideration to the standards around the grades coming into the road, I believe it's kicked up a little bit higher so that when a car's sitting there to turn left or right, they will be slightly more elevated than where they are, which will assist in the poise of sight. They can see to the top of the hill, and I think the assessment, if I summarise it, was that it was less than the minimum requirements for a 60 km/h assessment, but given the fact that it was 50, it was within acceptable bounds. I think it was also noted that due to the natural state of that road, traffic speeds are on average less than what you would expect on a 50 km/h street, and traffic speeds are a big factor in the ability to see cars and make safe choices when accessing or egressing.
And yes, because I walked there yesterday. It was a very long walk from North Hobart, but I did notice that there was a dead paddymelon on the side of the road, and also the access as a pedestrian is pretty hazardous, and there didn't seem to be much discussion about pedestrian safety or access.
Yeah, so as we understand it with the council, we've been asked to establish a crossover to a most recent standard that's municipal and picks up footpath capability. So our crossover would have provision for what we understand is a part of a future footpath streetscape project. I'm not aware of the details, except that we were asked by the council to make provision for this higher standard of crossover.
Yep, and obviously there's interest in access to the rivulet at some stage, and there does seem to be a natural kind of flow. When I met with Mr. Lees, I think he's your business partner, is that right? As applicant, he suggested that the information back from council was that access to that wasn't a priority presently. Is that?
Yeah, our original discussions and proposal was to either token sell or to gift more frontage of the rivulet for future purposes, but no, that was not pursued or wanted to be pursued by the council at that time.
Okay, so there'll be a question I'll ask of the director in a moment. Just in following up from Councillor Dutta's questions, and this will be the last question that I ask, but in relation, obviously you've heard from people who live in Waterworks Road who may not have heard directly or have had direct contact with you, and in Romilly Street. There is quite a lot of interest in the natural values, which and with bushfire management plans and whatever, it would be good to think that these things are retained. Would you be interested in, we do conciliation with parties to try and get parties together and sometimes that can alleviate or ameliorate some of the concerns. Now, whilst we have council officers, or we can organise conciliation, which is not part of the statutory process, and obviously there is only at the current position this expires next week. So would you be willing to have that discussion with concerned neighbours and representors, and perhaps defer or extend the expiry time that we consider this?
The representors, through the process of the council, all of those representations have been thoroughly well considered by us in our view of those, and the council, in working through the merit of those, and assessed against two standards: the internal standard and our standard of what we wish to see established in the community as far as doing a great job of this project. Whilst I won't say no to conciliation, I ask what the material benefit would be in light of the thorough process and where we see ourselves tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, well, sometimes when you have people actually who may have input, then you can get good or better outcomes. And whilst there's representations is part of it and part of the statutory process, as a community, it can be quite beneficial for parties who act in good faith or come together in good faith to come up with some solutions that may not be obvious or evident through the standard planning process. So
Okay.
that's, yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's something that you can consider if you would like to. Okay, thank you. So if there are no further questions, if you'd like to take your seats, thank you.
Can I ask a question, the Director, Chair?
Yes.
Thank you.
Alderman Briscoe.
It is a difficult one. There's a bit of a clash of values here. Our planning scheme clearly allows this development, in fact, a greater development. My question to the Director is, whilst we don't have to consider the bushfire plan, because that comes under the building part of it, is it possible that even if we had a condition for those 4 trees, I think it's 4 trees to be retained, that it could be overturned by the bushfire plan, because they're very close to the one existing house, or a couple of those existing proposed units?
Yeah, a good question, Chair. It is my understanding that those trees can be retained, subject, well, as I understand it, under a bushfire plan regime for that site. That is the advice that we received from the applicant to that question, that those trees can be retained and still satisfy the bushfire management requirements.
Okay, as a follow-up question, I presume this area was burnt out in the 67 bushfires, and one of the representatives who spoke to us, I can't remember who it was, it could have been Mr. Nola, referred to this being farming area at some stage, a farm or rural properties. Have we got any indication what the vegetation was like over the years? Because obviously a lot of vegetation has grown up and obviously brought some beautiful valleys back to our cities. I'm not suggesting it hasn't, but it may be that the vegetation here is a regrowth taking over former rural land. Have we got any indication? I know it's not directly related to this application, but the trees are not that big really compared with what they'd be if they were there for 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, look, I'd have to undertake some research to fully answer that question. But you're right; it was fairly heavily impacted by bushfires, and and if you do look at some of the historical imagery of the area was fairly heavily, removed of trees.
Yes,
And in fact, the tree cover is much more significant than what it was
in
earlier times.
Yes.
Look, in terms of the specifics of the question,
I wonder if I could take it on notice that, a private memo to everyone, or a memo to everyone, if you've got any information.
We'll pull out the aerial photographs of the area too.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Dutto?
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. Question number one, I read in the report that the traffic report was conducted in July. Do you think this would throw and provide the evidence which may not be all that accurate because of the pandemic at the time and people were not travelling as much?
Look, it's possible that is the case. I'm not sure as to what impact that would have had, but in terms of local traffic and being mindful that this is primarily a local street, we do know that it does serve access to Waterworks Reserve, so I'm not sure whether Waterworks Reserve was open at the time, but yeah.
And question number two, I again read that there is no written advice from the road authority. Is there any particular reason as to why don't we have that?
No, other than they weren't required necessarily to, unless it was for the purposes of owner consent to undertake works within the road reserve. I'd need to establish whether that was required to submit the application.
So, Chair, could there be a memo sent to us with regards to that? Confirm. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. We don't have any questions from the floor. Thank you. No, sorry, we don't. We just discuss it now. It's open for discussion with amongst the committee members. All right. So further discussion. We've got a motion before us, or any?
Look, just for the sake of debate, I'll move the motion, the officer's motion, but with an extra condition about landscaping, that the landscaping must include indigenous species to that area on advice that will maybe attract birds or retain birds, and also probably bushfire, more fire-resistant plants as well. So could that be a condition?
And the weed control.
Weeding in the riparian
zone. Your weeding. Yeah, all right. Yeah, and include the weeding part of as part of the recommendation. Yeah.
So that's not just in the riparian zone, is it?
No,
that's in
the whole area.
Whole area
across the site, including the covenanted area and the riparian zone.
So it probably just needs two parts to that.
Well, one's weed management, and one's additional plants, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, it is part of the landscape plan.
Thank you. Mr. Noy, the covenant, how strong is the covenant? I mean, how we've had covenants before which sometimes are extinguished, but can we have some indication as to how effective the covenant is?
Look, the covenant, and I'll quote from the titles, stipulates that not without the written consent of Hobart City Council to erect or permit to be erect any building or structure or carry out any works that may change the contours of the land or restrict the free flow of water over the land or cause erosion within the area marked as the covenant area on the plan.
Right. Okay.
Just a question out of curiosity, land on the other side of the rivulet, is that in the same situation? Is that covenanted as well? Or this is particular to this this lot?
It's well, I'm not sure whether there's a covenant on the other side, but this title only relates, or this covenant only relates to this site.
And it was placed by the previous owner.
Yep.
The previous owner requested the covenant.
It's interesting. It's specifies the Hobart City Council, so it may have been a requirement by council, but Mr. Reid might have. It was done in the title was issued in 2010, so I don't know whether Mr. Reid knows the background of the title.
I don't. I just assumed it was applied at the time of that subdivision. So something that
I suspect.
It's just additional to the motion I've moved that we have advised I think it can only be advice that the water retention system, if it in placing the water retention system, that any aspects of the old track is revealed, then repositioning of that water retention system. I think that's probably the officers could word that a little bit better than I.
That's outside of the covenanted area, isn't it? The retention?
It is outside the retention retention facility, but I think it's the
pipe.
That's
if the pipe goes into the rivulet, then if it uncovers the path, uncovers the path, then
shouldn't it be any historical fabric needs to be recorded?
It's not so much recorded. If it can be moved a metre or half a metre and avoid any it, that's to the satisfaction of the director, I imagine. But I don't think it can be a condition because it's not a protected heritage area. Yeah. So, but if there is some heritage, I think we should do our best. Advice to the applicant, and the applicant I think is nodding up there. Perhaps they'll consider that. It won't be a condition. It can't be a condition.
Councillor Harvey,
I think we're in a position that this is a compliant development application, and no one's argued against a development application, maybe the scale of the development application. But I think we're in a situation where it's recommended for approval, it's designated inner city residential or inner residential. I don't think there's strong enough grounds to refuse this in any way if we were of that view. So I'll support the recommendation for approval, subject to those additional
one condition,
advice and a condition.
Yeah.
And I'm taking the developer at his word that this is going to be a high quality development. That's what they're indicating, that they want to take a bit of pride in this development. I'm assuming, I'm paraphrasing you, I think, but the developer has indicated that he did want to do an exceptional job on the project. I don't have the concerns with regard to traffic management coming in and out. Every time I've driven down Romilly Street, you don't drive very fast down that street anyway. There's cars parked on the other side of the bridge, which slow the traffic down. So it's a fairly, low traffic speed area. And driving along Romilly Street is tricky at any time with cars parked on both sides of the street. And there's a lot of yielding that goes on along Romilly Street as well for cars to pass. So the traffic issues, I think, are resolved. The retention of 4 trees, the loss of, I think it's 11 trees is unfortunate, but they're most of them within the footprint of the tree, of the development. A couple of others that would impinge on particular buildings. The intrusion into the covenanted area is only minor from one, I think it's unit 2 it's only a bit of the deck. So look, on balance, I'll support the project. I know there were 38 representations against it, but the development is in an area that's designed for, that's allocated, that's zoned for residential development. So it's a very, awkward situation to say no to a development in a residential development area. Mr. Fraser also mentioned the number of units could have been a lot higher. I will challenge him on that because it doesn't say, it says subject to a number of things, number of constraints on the site which preclude a more dense development. These include the gradient of the site. So I don't know whether you could have included many more had you wanted to have maximised the development site. So 9 would seem like a fairly reasonable and acceptable amount based on the site. It couldn't have taken any more, I don't think. Whether you could, a development with less would be better for, I think, the local representatives, but that's not what's going to happen, and there's no requirement or there's nothing we could do to say reduce the number of dwellings on the site. That would be tantamount to refusal. So, like I've said, I'll support the project tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Now, I will have difficulty supporting this simply because of the fact that I have heard the representation and the views, and under the statutory rules that we have, we are supposed to hear them out. And in this particular regard, I am of the view that traffic for me is a particular issue. The study that was done in July, in my view, does not accurately reflect that. And so therefore I am presenting the other view. It may be argued otherwise, but I think considering the reduction of traffic at that point in time, I will have difficulty supporting this. I also feel quite strongly, having been there yesterday, while the traffic allowed, for example, the speed maybe 20 or 35, I've seen people passing that road at 40, 45. And I think that's human nature. People tend to do the wrong thing. And I find that particular aspect as hazardous. And therefore, I'll have difficulty supporting it. Thank you.
Are you foreshadowing refusal or?
I may, but I don't have the reason, so therefore I am not able to do that at this point in time.
You're talking about traffic on traffic grounds?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, Alderman Briscoe.
I wonder if you accept, after we consider this motion, a separate motion to do with a motion going to asking the Infrastructure Committee to look at parking and planning aspects of Romilly Street, because I think there is issues there.
Pedestrian access, yeah.
Yes,
yep.
After this, we consider this.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, further discussion? All right. Mr Noy, could you just confirm the question that I had of the applicant in relation to public access to the rivulet? I seem to recall that we did have a plan at some stage to have a walkway along the banks of Sandy Bay rivulet, and so what's your understanding as to why we wouldn't be looking at taking that on?
Yeah. Yes, Chair. I know that has been an aspiration of some of us in relation to that matter. It's not one, however, that I understand parks planners are necessarily of that view, and I think it's maybe a question for the City Amenity Division to respond to as the responsible division for park planning.
Perhaps that might be one of your questions.
Yeah, well, yes, can I just comment on that? I think it's very short-sighted that here we have a developer that we could get a bit of land for a future path at reasonable cost, because if the council in the future decides to go ahead with this, we'd probably have to compulsory acquire, and that would be much more expensive then. In between now and Monday, I think we'll need to ask a few questions individually, I think, but I'm disappointed that we didn't take up that offer, because obviously that is at least 10 metres along the rivulet there for possible future path, and even if it's not on the current program for 10 years or 20 years, it's still, we've got it reasonably cheaply, I imagine, but it's a discussion, obviously, the city parks people have to...
It seems like a natural flow down from
Yes.
The pipeline track there.
Yes.
And Mr Noy, just further to that, we've had a number of developments along Romilly Street and Kooyong Glen. Have we sought access at all, or bought any land along there?
Look, Chair, not that I'm aware of, but not that I'm aware of.
Well, I mean, that's the piecemeal nature of development, unfortunately, and it doesn't seem to be really forward-thinking, which is a real shame. This is a really difficult application, and I understand and feel the pain of residents around this area who feel like they're disenfranchised, partly because they didn't see notices, and public notices sometimes do have this problem. You know, it's where they're meant to be put from a statutory perspective, but may not be all that accessible as a result, and particularly when you're talking of properties across the valley, as we've heard tonight. There are some really important values, natural values that we've heard of tonight, and whilst I believe that the developers, I've met with Mr. Lees yesterday, I believe that their proposal is done on you know, with good intentions. It's obviously concerning to members of the local community that some of these values will not be retained and will be lost, and it's bit by bit that this is occurring within this valley. I find it very difficult to not support this, just based on the minor discretions, albeit a number of discretions. And I hear what Councillor Dutta is saying about the parking. I think parking, we will have more, the traffic movements will be much greater, obviously, but there's a certain way that this will work itself out. So I believe that it can be worked out, even though there will be quite a number of more traffic movements, particularly during cold winter days, turning right onto Romilly Street from the property. So yes, very hard to support and not support this, and I would much prefer if parties could, between now and then, we don't have a motion to suggest that we undertake conciliation. We just have the motion with conditions and amendments, but it would be very good from my perspective if there was that possibility of the applicant finding some common ground, or hearing at least some of the concerns that representors have raised. So if there's no further comment or discussion, we have the motion before us. So I'll move that motion. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no.
No.
So raise your hands. So got that, Dave? And obviously Alderman Barakis isn't here, and against is Councillor Dutta. So that will go to full council next Monday. So if there's discussions between now and then, I hope that something might be able to come out of that. Thank you.
Chair, so I move a motion that the traffic and parking aspects of Romilly Street be considered, and also information sought from the the possible acquisition of land.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So we have that motion, which is in the Planning Authority motion. Councillor Coates is just leaving the room, but we still have a quorum. So
can I just hear that again, please? Sorry.
Confirm. So the idea is that we're just asking the Infrastructure Committee to look at a possible parking and traffic management plan for Romilly Street.
Which there might be anyway.
Yeah, there might be.
Yeah.
And secondly, the amenity director information we sought from the amenity director regarding the possible South Hobart, Sandy Bay Rivulet track.
Okay, so I'll put that motion.
Sorry, it's a bit long-winded. Aye.
Those against? Items carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now what do we, can we have a 2-minute adjournment, please? And I think we've got other representors or deputations. So I'll adjourn the meeting for just a couple of minutes. Thank you. Right, thank you. I'll re-adjourn this meeting, and we'll move now to item 7.1.4, which is 139 Elizabeth Street. And we have representors Dennis McLaughlin and Cassie Midgley. Are you coming up together? Yep, if you come and sit in those red chairs at the front.
You're coming back.
Ah, right, okay, thank you.
I'm going to have to make the sandwiches.
So take a seat.
Sorry, I've lost my partner, or my friend.
Okay, you can take a seat if you like. Yeah. And you have 5 minutes or a little bit more.
Can I ask permission whether we might have 10 minutes between us?
Let's see how we go.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I don't want to be whingy or whiny, but as you may have read in our representation, my representation, that we came to the meeting here where the university put on their big spiel and spruik, and we were optimistic things would go well. And we got, things said like it really matters to us about doing these things, and we're doing them with the community. And at those critical formal points in the process, there can be an open public discussion. And Rufus Black said, indeed, that is something he welcomes. He said, promising that the Hobart community will experience a far more consultative process with proposed UTAS developments henceforth. And, there was a lot of promise of being a good neighbour. And I'm sorry to report it's been exactly the opposite. We've been heavily bullied, bulldozed, run over, ignored. In fact, to this day, I've still not been able to make contact with anybody at the university. Our only interface is the heavy-duty foreman of Hutchison's Builders, who the first day when I walked up the lane was told I was trespassing, I was stealing things, I was there to line up stuff to steal, and that they were going to take my photo and report me to the police. This is in a laneway that I've owned the building in for 45 years.
Yep, so it's a common laneway.
The common laneway.
Yeah.
I just simply walked
Public
up.
right-of-way.
A week earlier I asked about, could I speak to the architectural historians? Could they give me a contact? And was basically told to F off.
Okay.
The reason I wanted to do that is the university bought the warehouse at the end of the lane from me, and I knew from various research and people that actually worked and built that warehouse, there was a tunnel there that went up to Trinity Church behind the back wall, and I wanted to sort of let the people of Hobart, historians, know that this could be something very interesting, but it was bulldozed and so was I. So,
Mr. McLaughlin, we're talking about this specific...
Okay, sorry, I have got off.
Yeah, no, I understand your frustrations, but if you can just focus on
All right, well, I'm bringing this up because we've had promises made and the council seem to be in lockstep with the university, and that with this development, we're afraid that maybe the situation might go downhill for us. And I just think it's important that I can get the message through that we're not getting the cooperation, the good neighbour thing from the university or any consultation. To this day, and our property is central to the neighbouring properties, and it's the closest, it's 10 feet from the development. Nobody from the university has ever been in contact with me about, even saying, well, we're doing this backyard, would you like to be part of the beautification? No, it's just always, it just gets done and there's no consultation from us. So we are concerned about, as I say in my presentation, we really are looking forward to this happening. We think the lane is a good idea, but it will also expose the back of our properties to hundreds and hundreds of people that have never had access, because we always had a gateway on the laneway and we were able to keep our property secure overnight. Nobody's spoken to us about securing our properties. There'll be a massive amount of humans around the back, and you know, we would like to be consulted on the implications of what's going on.
Okay.
So yeah, going through this, you know, we feel that a lot of money's been spent by the council to ensure that there's dry walkways around our city so that the shoppers, you know, can move freely in inclement weather, and that the loss of that awning will be you know, a bad thing for foot traffic that are trying to access our businesses. Yeah, so we would like some sort of continued awning to go through to keep the Elizabeth Street dry there.
Are there other things that you wanted to raise, Ms. Midgley?
Yes, well, since I've put this in, apparently a few people that work in shops, you know, like shop assistants, for want of a better word, apparently the university went around last week and were doing a little bit of, you know, PR. And in that process, they've mentioned that they want to keep the laneway, the roadway, the inbound lane of Melville Street. So we're not talking just about the lane. The inbound lane of Melville Street, which has been closed for over 12 months already, which has had a huge impact, as well as COVID, obviously. But our shops have suffered greatly in terms of people accessing it. That they're going to try, and I remember on the first drawings we saw that Melville Street was proposed to be like a mall. Now, if we lose, if all those shops down our side and both sides of Elizabeth Street there, and the top side, I've talked to the shops that go up opposite the other UTAS building, they are horrified to think that we may lose the inbound lane of Melville Street. And we are fearful that this... See, the Melville Street was closed, and I wrote a letter about it and got an answer back from council to say there was consultation. Well, I can't find anyone that was consulted. The lane was just closed in the works, and this, you know, we've got new works now that we're afraid that once again things will get done without any thought to us.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. So I think if those are the main points that you're raising about this application that was before us, we'll go to questions. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you. Very interesting perspective of a big institution like the university.
Beg your pardon?
It's interesting that you say comments about a big institution like the university, who promise everything but deliver very little. The concerns, obviously we can bring up those concerns when we talk to the university. However, from you've got one of the neighbouring properties to the proposed laneway, haven't you? Is that
yes, we're the closest. Our back wall is the closest to the development, right, and we're in the middle of the laneway.
Yeah, so I don't know why my microphone's not working, but I'll try my school teacher voice. So you would like some kind of security gate at the rear of your property to be closed at night?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, I'll ask the director when we come to discuss whether it's possible to set a condition like that. It seems reasonable too. If you're turning a previous private laneway into a public laneway, then you have to protect the needs of the surrounding owners. I share your concerns about Melville Street, by the way. And so that hasn't come before council, but we were told by the Vice-Chancellor that he has plans for that street. Obviously it involves the Hobart City Council and planning applications, so there'll be hopefully plenty of opportunities to get input into that. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Could you tell me where exactly you want this gate you're talking about? Can I approach?
Yes.
And you could just show me, because I don't know what you mean. The gate, I assume, the original gate was at the start of the laneway?
Yes. Yes.
And now you're talking about a gate somewhere?
Yes. Well, it's a very narrow laneway, so obviously we've got to be careful that we don't narrow the laneway.
Yep, so where do you want the gate?
Where are
There's your property there?
Property here,
Yeah, okay. Well, one possibility would be there.
Just there?
Right there.
Yep.
And if that wasn't possible, because there's no good putting posts in and narrowing it further.
Yeah, no, I just want to know, because I thought you might want it at the back here to cut off the whole laneway.
No, because it was
Just
there
your property.
when that shop was there. We were able to stop anyone coming in.
Yep.
Now that's going to be a big open place, but of course there is a walkway down the side.
On the screen.
So if it can't be there, possibly across
The
here.
plans, maybe.
All right,
some way.
okay.
There's quite a few, there's a lot of accesses to
Councillor
all
Harvey?
the
A lot of back
properties in
doors.
there. Yeah.
Harvey, what page of the...
I'm looking at Google Earth.
Yes, that's what I thought he was.
I'll do a run around.
We were about to get
Please
it up
don't
on the
do a
screen.
run around. Just
No,
please.
COVID safe,
tell
please.
us.
COVID safe.
Just Google Earth, 133 Elizabeth Street.
Yeah, I've done that.
Okay, good. All right. 3.3.
What page is that?
Okay, are there any further questions? Any further questions? Councillor Dutton? No? Okay, thank you. If you'd like to return to your seat, where are they sitting?
Oh, you're trying to find it, right?
Agenda. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 505. Page 505 for us who want to look this up. So we've got a bit of an idea.
It's easier on Google Earth to
Yeah,
see.
just Google Earth here. Yeah, but, yeah, good.
Just try and get it.
Yeah, good.
So
Perhaps
there's Google Earth. Mr. Noy, can you point it out, please?
I'm not quite sure what I'm pointing at.
Go to 133A.
Yeah, so there's 133A.
Yeah, and then see the lane behind it?
The lane
Yeah,
is...
and stop right there, just on the corner of the building, a gate there.
The gate there.
Yeah.
So what's the question?
how many,
Is that possible?
is that possible
Well, look, it's
as a condition?
Look, it's no, I don't believe it could be done by condition. It's a civil matter. I think we would need to fully understand what rights we are impinging on with any structure along that across that lane at that point.
But it might be possible. How is it turning into a public lane when it's a private right-of-way, isn't it? So how can the university interfere with the rights of the representor turning his private right-of-way into a public lane without consulting him?
Perhaps we can have the applicant up as part of this process.
That's what you're here for.
Mr. Reid and Mr. Evans, would you like to come forward, please? Is there anybody else?
Yes, I have Phil McMahon as well.
Mr. McMahon? Okay, well, you've heard some of the concerns raised. Obviously,
Thank
some
you.
of those are in a broader consultative context of your client, Mr. Reid.
Yes, look, I can't speak directly on the consultation aspects. I think either Glenn or Phil might make some comments about that. But in terms of the right-of-way issue, I think putting a gate across the right-of-way could be problematic in that there are other beneficiaries of the right-of-way. If it was a matter of putting a gate along the neighbour's back boundary, if you like, that might be something that could be discussed, but I don't think the university could put a gate across the laneway. well, unless that was agreed between all parties and everyone had a key and whatever, I don't know, but it's, I think it's something difficult to deal with on the hop.
Can we just have silence in the back? Thank you.
So in terms of the proposal, sorry.
Perhaps if you speak up a little bit, sorry.
Yeah, in terms of the proposal itself, I think it's fairly clear what the university is trying to achieve here, and that is a good line of sight from Elizabeth Street into that main new courtyard of the new student accommodation. And the whole objective is there to actually increase activation and passive surveillance of that area, and to try and get people moving through the site from Elizabeth Street. You might recall some sort of criticism of the success of the courtyard in PBSA 1, which is the more recent or the complete student accommodation building. And this is probably part of the learnings of that is to try and draw people through the site. Council would be aware of the university's ownership of the Webster site as well. So ultimately it's part of a broader thinking to try and draw people through the site. So I think there'll be significant sort of passive surveillance benefits for that. In terms of the disturbance to the neighbours during construction, that is unfortunate, but it is a finite thing, and it's difficult to sort of comment on behalf of the builder and how they've responded. They're not here to respond to any particular accusations, but the university does genuinely want to continue to engage, and maybe we can talk a little bit more. I don't know if it's Glenn or Phil.
Yeah, no question. So I'm Phil McMahon. I'm leading the planning for our move into the broader CBD for the university, and picked up the project in recent months. There's absolutely no question we're committed to consulting, as Rufus was quoted as referencing, and I think it'd be fair to say I'd like to apologise to the gentleman here tonight if we failed in that regard. Then we'd like the opportunity to address that. It's certainly our intent to reach out and make those contacts and have that relationship. We did endeavour, as he mentioned last week, myself and Glenn actually started to contact the stores there that we could and that were available to talk with, and we're looking to continue that process and make sure that we engage directly with everyone, identify their concerns and see what we can do to work together to address. And I'd certainly welcome the opportunity to leave my contact details with the gentleman.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, it's not really in our realm to be chasing up that communication, but you'll probably be leaving the room at the same time, so perhaps you can do that. In relation to the awning, as described, obviously that's going to be removed. Was there much thought about retaining it, or what was the thinking?
Certainly we did look at this early on in the concept phase, and I suppose we're conscious of the Elizabeth Street spine and the row of awnings. The awning at the moment on that building probably doesn't sit very well within the pattern of the street, but that's not to say if you had a building there you couldn't retain it and do a better job. But the pattern of laneways within the city is not to have an awning. And that was Council's view as well. So it's probably best. It would be awkward to do an awning. I think visually it probably wouldn't sit quite well, and it is a short gap, like nothing like a Melville Street crossing gap in the awnings, for example. So
it's what, 10 metres, if that, or
it's probably less than 10 metres, but I can probably measure it here for you.
Okay, so anybody walking will hit some rain. Hopefully not too many heavy drops.
Yeah, it's 5.5 metres.
5.5 metres. Okay. All right. Thank you. Any further questions of the applicants? Alderman Briscoe.
Yes. Just looking at the render of the removed building and the two buildings on either side, I could say, without doubt that unless you did some treatment with the permission of the owners, that would be tagged, graffitied like mad. In that, if you look at the graffiti that are on the ceiling, above the roof and that. So is there any plans to do some public art, artwork along those walls with the permission of the owners to avoid the tagging and graffitiing?
So we haven't directly addressed those two particular walls at this stage. We are working with the Vibrance Festival at the moment to put some plans together for street art. For the wall on the back of the old heritage building at the top of the laneway there that will be created. We'll be looking to create something there. And we're also working on the front of the McCann's building, a proposal to possibly look at that. So there's no reason why we can't progress further and create some, symmetry, I guess.
Yes. Yes, I could see a mural reflecting the colonial or the late Victorian, early 20th century shopping precinct that was, but at the moment it's not being addressed, but you'll be in your back of your mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a theme we're interested in throughout the CBD.
Yeah, thank you.
So it looks like the treatment of the laneway directly behind the crossing laneway, the cross laneway from Melville Street. So the treatment is a different surface. That's correct, is it?
It's intended to follow the surface through. Well, there is some articulation of that crossing, but it is intended to repave that area. But that would be done in consultation with the neighbours. So it's really it's either side of the laneway on the university's land, with the intention to actually work with the neighbours to actually enhance that right-of-way strip through there as well.
That car park directly south on the plan, that's not yours, is it?
On the
tradeway,
the adjacent to the south is not university, I don't think.
It's a tradeware property, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. I'm just
discussions there to offer to help them, address that area as well to make it tie in with the rest of the walkway.
Okay. And are there any concerns? I don't know if this is a question for you, Fraser, but any concerns in relation to entrapment again from that laneway off Melville Street? I know this is obviously opening it up to the courtyard as such, but we do have an area which is a cul-de-sac or a dead end.
There is a master plan that's attached to the agenda. I'm just looking here what page it is on your agenda. We can't actually see what the page number is, but it's in the master plan, the Arcadia document.
Page 540, Mr. Reid.
552.
It's this one. This one here. I can't see the page.
552.
552. Maybe the next one down from that, right?
553.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, so extension of the herringbone. Is it the external lighting that you're talking about, or?
So that one there, it's a little bit hard to see on the thing, but there are the visual surveillance. So the visual surveillance is from, I suppose, from the student accommodation common areas themselves, looking down, and then from the other activated areas within the area. So there is, we're talking, I think there's 430 odd students in this building, and the same across the road. So it is actually, quite an active area at night. Is there a particular area there that you were concerned about?
Well, I was just thinking about, the sort of southernmost part of the laneway, which is my concern, but and probably a concern of those providing deputations as well in relation to antisocial behaviour. It's in some ways it's out of the scope of what you're proposing, but it's directly connected, and I suppose, you know, the university has a responsibility to make that area safe, not only from vandalism, but for also for lighting and...
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I think the first point is that this situation exists in terms of that southern end of the laneway at the moment, and the courtyard of the PBAS2 sort of spilling down into that area. The proposed laneway will actually lead to further passive surveillance in the area, further activity. I don't know whether, Phil, you're able to comment any more in relation to like how the university manages it's sort of semi-public spaces, if you like.
Well, we certainly will have rotating security patrols as needed, and if we were ever aware of issues in a particular area, we'd concentrate patrols where we needed to. But again, that's an area where we were looking to engage with the other property owners down the laneway to identify what their concerns are and what we can do to resolve those issues, you know, in terms of if surveillance cameras are needed, etc.
Thank you. Alderman Briscoe?
Yeah, it probably is directly related to the comment you just made. What's the legal status of that laneway? Is it a right-of-way, and or is it owned by the university, or is it owned by the city? Because I imagine, let's go through a scenario. If it's owned by the landowners along that lane, so-called laneway,
yes,
then they would have a legal right to put a fence, a gate. So I'd like to know what your understanding of the legal...
Yeah, look, the status of it's really a right-of-way.
It is a right-of-way.
With multiple beneficiaries.
Yes.
Council doesn't, or council has indicated that it doesn't consider that it owns the underlying land. And the university has gone to great lengths to chase back the original owner of the land, and that information was included with the application.
Yeah.
So we're unable to determine the original owner of the land, but it's fair to say that there are the university would be the major beneficiary of it in terms of the adjacent.
Well,
land.
what I'm saying is that 133 may have a right to do a gate.
Not to the extent that it would infringe anyone else's right-of-way.
No, a right-of-way, my understanding of land law is that if you have a right-of-way, you have a right to put a gate on it. Obviously, you have to provide the key. So that's why it's so important for you to have really good discussions with those owners, beneficial owners of that right-of-way. What you're doing, obviously the building you've demolished, that's your land, or the university's land, so you can do whatever you like there, I imagine,
yes,
with it. But the actual...
well, to an extent.
Well, we're subject to planning approval.
It's not a planning matter here today, though.
No, but if we're giving a permission to do something and we're ignoring the landowners or the beneficiary owners of that right-of-way, anyway, probably we're just alerting you to an issue that if owner of 133 would like to have a deep discussion with you about that, I think he'd have some rights.
I think that's clear and well understood by the university, and that's the intention, is to work through those issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, I'll ask you to take your seats again. Thank you.
Chairman, I'm happy to move the recommendation. I think the thoroughfare is a great idea, and having walked down the lanes the other day and looked at how nearing completion the project is, I look forward to seeing it completed, and I look forward to seeing this laneway opened up. And the other issues with regard to gates further on is a civil issue, so that'll be up to the university and the other owners of the properties to resolve. Looking at that master plan, you can see the areas where there'll be public art, or potentially public art. So that's exciting. When it comes to the awning, as Mr. Fraser said, we don't have awnings across lanes in Hobart, so I don't support the need for an awning. And I'm happy to go ahead with what's been proposed here tonight from UTAS with regard to this. So very happy to move the item.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Further discussion, Alderman Briscoe.
Yeah, I think apart from being quite stern at the university as an applicant a moment ago, I think it's a great idea to actually demolish a building which could actually earn income for them to make a public laneway, even if it's owned by the university, and the potential possibly of having cafe seating there and a cafe, outside cafe. It fits in with everything the city has been trying to do for years, interconnectivity of the streets, making it more pedestrian friendly. And so I support it 100%, knowing that you have just committed to having really deep discussions with the beneficial owners of that, the one from Melville Street. And I'd just like to make a comment about Melville Street. I think it's good that the university is undergoing consultation with the owners of businesses in Elizabeth Street and in Melville Street, because as we've seen the debacle of Midtown, where many business owners have felt disenfranchised with plans, I think it's probably something that you could avoid by having consultations. So well done to the university for coming to us with this plan.
Further discussion, Councillor Data?
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to endorse the point that has been made, and I want to also very strongly compliment the apology that was offered, and I think that's a very good gesture from the part of the university. And I hope that in the future they will continue with the consultation, as they've said, because this is an important part of carrying the community with you. And I go along with also the Councillor Harvey's point that, I find this particular issue of the right-of-way as a civil matter, and therefore I don't have any difficulty supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey?
Just to refute Councillor Briscoe's comment that there was a debacle with regard to consultation with Midtown. That's completely not true, and we can't let that stand on the record, so I will dispute that there was any debacle with the Midtown consultation process.
Look, I also, just a question I forgot to ask. The name Penny Lane, apart from a reference to Beatles, what historic context is there with the name? Or does Rufus like the Beatles?
It is a play on the McCann music that's been in place there since 1930s. We thought, as we were looking at ideas, it was as good as everything else we identified at the stage.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Look, I welcome any sort of connection and permeability that is afforded by this application. I am concerned that there hasn't been that consultation with the neighbours, and I have seen other situations where the consultation has been less than impressive, unfortunately. So I really hope that the university can work well and be a good neighbour. It's really important that everybody gets on well in this area. And we know that good community engagement can work really well. And I look forward to seeing improvements along that crossing laneway from Melville Street, so that those concerns that I've raised, hopefully you'll be able to take those on notice in regards passive surveillance and ensuring there's not the concerns I have in relation to entrapment down that laneway, a little bit outside of the scope of this. In relation to the awnings, I think it's fabulous to have the awnings along there, but it is only a few metres, so it's only a couple of seconds that you're unlikely to be covered there. So whilst the awnings are fabulous along Elizabeth Street, I think given this is opening it up to a laneway, I think that's fine as well. So we have the motion with those few suggestions. So I'll put
Are
them.
the suggestions included? They're not, are they?
What suggestion?
Oh, didn't you add
No,
suggestions?
it's
No?
Councillor Harvey.
No, so it's just the discussion and.
I've just moved the motion as it is on the books.
All right, so I'll put the motion for approval. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried unanimously, and that decision is made. It doesn't go to council. We go now to item 7.1.1, which is 130 Murray Street. And we have the applicant here. He's here for everything today, with Mr. Upton and Daniel Lane if we require it. So I'll open the item for discussion. Are there any questions of Mr. Noy or the applicant?
Sorry, Chair, what item are we up to?
7.1.4. Oh, sorry, 7.1.1, which is 130 Murray Street on the...
Has someone moved that? Or?
Okay, Councillor Dutters moved it. Discussion?
No deputations with this.
No, it's only Mr. Reed's here if we need any questions of him.
This, through you, Chair, this already had a DA approved, didn't it, a number of years ago?
Yes, I think that's in the background. Yeah, to 5 or 6 stories, I think. The previous proposal, it lapsed, and they've come back with a further proposal.
Further discussion, Alderman Briscoe?
Yeah, I think in the heritage report, it's an interesting photograph of the corner. We're talking about this corner that surrounds that corner property. Interesting that the corner property, which is the heritage part of this application, was a service station, and now it's a shop, but still retained behind that shop is a very early building. So one day, hopefully, the 60s or 50s or 60s shop is removed and we reveal that very early building. But this doesn't affect the heritage of it. So, noting from the heritage report, I read it very carefully, it's unlikely to have any, or the assessment is there will be no heritage in the archaeology because of the levels have been excavated for that building that's going to be removed. So it's unlikely to be any remnants of an old weatherboard house there, an early weatherboard house, and so on. So I think it's a good development.
Mr. Noy, the setback from the first or second story, it doesn't seem to be set back all that far. Is that a problem in relation to urban design?
Well, not necessarily from a scheme and building envelope perspective. It fits within the amenity building envelope. There is some setback that provides a little bit of recessive treatment to that facade, but the overall height is not problematic, and I think that's a view that's been expressed by the Urban Design Advisory Panel.
Okay, and in relation, there was a couple of questions from one of the representatives that was sent through again, concerned about the light wheel on the boundary of their property, and also concerned about the rain catchment off the side wall and the appropriate discharge. Could you just address those couple of questions?
Well, the light well is been put in place to ensure that if a building is constructed on the adjacent property, then light is access to light is retained and preserved. It's important to note that this proposal has been assessed against those more rigorous planning scheme amendments. So it fulfils those more rigorous standards. So that's positive. In relation to the question around rainfall or stormwater from the side of the building, all those matters are covered under the Building Act, and you're not able to concentrate stormwater onto an adjacent property. So all those matters will be picked up as part of the detailed construction design process.
All right, thank you. Thanks. So if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion moved by Councillor Dutta. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Items carried unanimously. Does that go to full council, Dave?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so that will go next week. So 21 Carr Street, 7.1.2, Argos and 19 Carr Street is the subdivision 1 additional lot.
Happy to move that, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Thank you. Any discussion?
There was one representation. Could we just quickly address that? I don't know the site well enough to put it into context. I didn't get a chance to pop by.
So I think, well, I did yesterday, and I happened to run into the representor who was gardening, so it was by chance.
When you were walking.
No. And Billy didn't go after him or anything. But no, the concern that he had was to that common right of way, the
Yes.
speed hump, and also I think there was ongoing leakage of sewage or, some stormwater discharge problems which come up all the time.
But it was crossing a speed hump on an angle that was going to be the issue, which I don't think it has any impact on your vehicle.
Sonoy?
Well, I'm not a mechanical, engineer associated with car mechanics, so I'm not.
Can't comment.
I can't comment.
What about common sense?
Common sense. Well, I won't comment on that.
Seriously, is the address, those concerns been addressed from the applicant?
Look, it's my understanding that we weren't necessarily of the view that speed hump was required, but I did note my reading of that it was included.
Why would there be a speed hump in a lane?
I think it's to reduce vehicle speed coming out of the lane,
I know, I get that bit, but why would you have it in a private laneway where there's only a couple of households that it services?
Quite a long lane.
Yeah, I think it's about pedestrians.
Slowing pedestrians down with the speed hump.
Pedestrians coming down Carr Street, and you want to slow vehicles coming out of that. So they have time to react to pedestrians.
Okay, that's clear. I wasn't aware where the speed hump was proposed. Yep.
Any further discussion? Okay, no further discussion. I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 7.1.3 is to Evelyn Crescent, Sandy Bay. It's 2 multiple dwellings. Have somebody move that, please?
Yep.
Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Discussion? And again, I think there was only 1 or 2 representatives. Was that issue of overlooking addressed?
Yes, there was a screen to 1.5
Okay.
metres high proposed by way of condition.
All right, okay. No further discussion. I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Excellent. We're getting through them. 39. I think we're up to reports, are we not? 8.1 is new delegations required due to amendments to planning legislation. Ms Amy, can you just go through the same sort of description that you gave me earlier, please?
Yes. The government has introduced a variety of amendments to existing legislation to impose new timelines on various steps that we already do. As part of that process, we reviewed the existing delegations to make sure that we had the necessary powers to action what needed to be actioned. And we found that we were deficient in 2 respects. One is for a new legislative process, which is a process that we've already been doing informally, but is now enshrined in the legislation. So that's in section 60 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. So there are currently no delegations in place at all for that, and those assessments are to make sure that when somebody has to provide detailed plans, for example, under a planning permit, or they need to submit something like a construction management plan, where there's further assessment that needs to be done at a planning level, which we call condition endorsement, that's done normally at officer level and would, I don't think, ever comes to the council, does it? So we're proposing that those formal delegations are made so that our practice can continue. The other delegation that is proposed relates to the Strata Titles Act. there are existing delegations in place for the Strata Titles Act, but due to these amendments, there are extra steps that have been introduced into Section 31. So we're proposing that a delegation's made under Section 31 for all of the powers under that section to make sure that, again, we have the legislative powers to reflect what has been happening in a practical sense for quite some time.
Thank you. All right.
There's no material changes that we're talking about here, it's just codifying it, or whatever you want to...
Effectively, both of these processes have always been done at officer level. It's just that there are now legislative steps rather than informal processes that we go through.
Yeah. Happy to move that item.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. All right, those in favour?
You are happy with it though, aren't you? It makes sense, and the officers agree with this.
The red tape reduction?
Yeah, this is a red tape thing, is it?
I think it will be better for everybody. I think it'll take a little while to get used to it, but yes, I think ultimately it'll be better for everyone. Yes.
We see a silver lining.
We're not being pushed to do more for less, you know.
Yes, but
yes,
yes, that's the bottom line, isn't it? Okay, those in favour of the motion moved by Councillor Harvey, those say aye. Those against, items carried. Thank you for that explanation. Motion's carried. Items carried. 8.2 is delegated decisions report planning. Thanks, Councillor Harvey. I'll move that be received and noted. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Items carried. 8.3 is city planning advertising report. Is there anything that we need to be aware of?
There are a number of matters that will come to the committee and the council, but none of them that are particularly large developments.
We've got Kooyong Glen again. Is that the same one that's been
yes.
up before?
So this has been advertised. This is the third time it's been advertised for various reasons, and there's quite a lot of community interest in that property. I think that's been a little bit of a build-up from a number of developments in that area, and I understand its general frustration with booming developments, I guess, rather than necessarily this one being a particularly controversial application.
Okay.
Liverpool Street one? Is that a vacant block?
The Liverpool Street is the Leslie's development, and the current proposal is for an illuminated sign, which was part of the previous application, and that was
$2 million illuminated sign.
the whole project. So that is not supported by the THC, and I understand that will be recommended by the council officers.
Refusal.
Officers as well.
That's the Commonwealth Bank. Leslie's, yes. Sorry, you're right. Sorry.
The new Commonwealth Bank and Bendigo Bank. I'm happy to move those.
All right, thank you. All right, those in favour? Aye. Those against? Items carried. Committee action status report, item 9.1.
I move.
Thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 10 is responses to a number of questions without notice.
Move that.
Thank you. On block. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 11, questions without notice.
Yes, referring back to the answer kindly given to the Director about the mean, mode and median, without a unit, I thought the worst, 23 years, 6 years, 14 years, or 23 months, 6 months, or 14 months, or is it 23 days, 6 days, 14 days, and so I wonder if I could have an answer that referring to days, months or years.
Days.
Thank you. There seem to be 23 is the mean. It must mean there are some that go to, that's an extreme mean. You explain the mean? Because the mode is 6 days, the median, the most common, or the middle number is 14 days, but 23 is the mean. Seems like you're going to have some out.
There will be some extremes, yes.
Perhaps I should have asked for the range as well. So could the range of the be given as well? Yeah, which should be quite an easy job.
Yeah.
It's not as hard as this
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Any further questions? Okay, I'll ask that somebody
Yeah, I'll move.
move that we go into the closed portion of the meeting. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you. And we now say goodbye to those who might have been watching from the live stream.
Do we know how many we're watching?
We need to